So really, Uzbekistan was not on my radar. Uzbekistan is blessed with a very young workforce, and that demographic dividend will pay hugely. I encourage them, at least some of them, to stay on. That there is no better time to come into this country, whether you are an innovator, whether you are an investor. The areas of improvement would be for youngsters to, I was very gladly surprised that all these leading universities invited me to teach.
Hello and welcome to Daryo Talks. Today we are going to talk about the business climate, investment climate, and a story of an IT entrepreneur from India during our talk with our honorable guest, Sachdev Ramakrishna. Sachdev, thank you very much for agreeing to come and give interview for us.
Assalamu alaikum, Saidaziz. Absolute pleasure and delighted to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Sachdev, I have seen you in a lot of conferences in Tashkent, and we met there, and I observed this eternal energy and motivation that you have, and that's a very key thing that an entrepreneur should have. Can you briefly tell us about your educational background and business background, career background, just to begin with?
Thank you, Saidaziz. So, by training, I'm a chemical engineer. I have 2 degrees in chemical engineering, including one from one of the best engineering schools, the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras.
That's the MIT of India.
MIT of India. And then I was fortunate enough later in my career to get a scholarship from the Asian Development Bank in Japan to go to Manila in the Philippines to do my MBA at the Asian Institute of Management in the Philippines, a school set up by Harvard Business School as the Asian Harvard in 1969. So I did that. And then I did a series of jobs. First many years with a Danish company starting up cement factories, handing them over to customers. Then not knowing what happened to the cement outside the factory, I said I should get an MBA. Then I became a classical management consultant, looking at the world in 2x2 frameworks. And then I became the chief strategy officer for a large Bombay-based businessman, helping him manage a set of businesses. We created a new retail mall like Samarkand Darwaza way back in 1998, then the biggest retail mall in India.
Just the time when the malls were starting to boom.
And we of course worked with McKinsey & Company for our strategy. And then I spun off to do internet startup. I was the chief operating officer of a fiber optics broadband high-speed internet company. Then I jumped off to become the chief information officer of a New York Stock Exchange listed pharmaceutical company whose products are sold in Uzbekistan, Dr. Reddy's. Subsequently, I again changed floors by becoming a global head of marketing for a large BPO company, a $1 billion company today, acquired by EDS and HP in the US. And then I joined a French major as their Asia Pacific strategy marketing director. Then I joined another Tata company as their chief marketing officer. Then I worked for a Silicon Valley company as their remote CMO, but in India during the COVID period. And then this opportunity came from Uzbekistan to...
Yeah, that's a very impressive, long and interesting journey that you had. Right. And I can already notice you worked both NYSE listed companies, backed companies, let's say, and Silicon Valley associated firms. That's very impressive. And and also an interesting point that you had an MBA that probably seeded you some international worldview.
Absolutely.
So and then you came to Uzbekistan. So what brought you here? Why Uzbekistan?
So really, Uzbekistan was not on my radar. Clearly in school one had heard of the Great Silk Road and of the great historical places like Samarkand and Bukhara. And of course Tashkent, which was etched in our memory because one of our very senior leaders, our Prime Minister Shastri died here.
Yeah.
So we had some connections with Uzbekistan, but I didn't realize I would land up here. There was an entrepreneurial opportunity that happened for a company that was looking at this market and trying to do digital transformation of large state-owned enterprises, which were ripe in their transformation journey, driven by your president's great foresight and vision of the Decree 6079 that encouraged digitalization of large state-owned companies to help them gain greater economic efficiency, gain greater competitiveness in their postures in their industries.
Yes.
And we said we have done this elsewhere in the world.
Yeah.
Let's try and replicate that formula here. And so we started some work with a large state-owned company. We had some early successes. But then having lived here, having immersed myself in Uzbek society, having had colleagues who were Uzbeks, having traveled the length and breadth of a beautiful country from Termes to the Aral Sea, Jizak, Moinak, Kakand, Andijan, Margilan, Rishtan, Namangan, Chust, Tashkent, Samarkand, Bukhara, Khiva, like many foreigners, I fell in love with the place. And I saw many parallels with India. I saw a quarter of your GDP and workforce was in agriculture, as was in erstwhile India. And I said, there's much more to do here.
I see. So, just to clarify, when you started your venture, as far as I know, you hired both Indian professionals from India and also local.
That's right. That's right.
Specialists, right?
That's right. Because in the nature of big enterprise-wide transformation we were setting out to do, we had to inject certain specialization with people who had done similar work elsewhere in the world, so that the functional technical expertise could just be seeded in very quickly. But then you obviously needed a local team who were very good project managers, who had the same cultural affinity with our customers, and they helped bridge some of the gaps which we as foreigners will never be able to see. So
I see. So if you can comment on, because that has been an interesting topic for me for a while, how would you assess the potential of Uzbek professionals, because their language skills and professional skills, what would be your assessment as an IT entrepreneur who came here?
So Saidaziz, I will cut this in a couple of ways. Uzbekistan is blessed with a very young workforce. I think about 40-45% of your country is less than 25, and that demographic dividend will pay hugely. The young workforce are brave, ambitious, talented, hungry, global in mindset, wanting to conquer the world. Very true of their generational aspirations. So that's a huge potential to ride on. All the staff we hired had this three-pronged advantages. They spoke excellent English, which was a big advantage for us as foreigners settling in here. They spoke excellent Uzbek, which made us getting closer to our customers. And they, of course, spoke Russian, which is also important in the business climate here, because the older stakeholders tend to still speak Russian as part of their business lingua franca. So, long story short, there was absolutely no gap there. On certain skills, I think there will be some need for upgradation, which will only come from immersion, experience, internships, followership. But otherwise, I see a huge potential and promise.
I see. Thank you. So, and how long? When did that happen that you came? How long have you been here?
So I've been here for a little over 2 years. Psychologically, for about 3 years, as I started to warm up to the possibility of working in Uzbekistan. But 2 years being on the ground here, talking to brilliant young minds like you, all wanting to progress the nation. And I find there's a certain openness in modern day Uzbekistan, wanting to embrace the best from across the world, right, for the greater good of the country.
Yeah, and 2 years actually is probably a good time to make an assessment of how your business has been successful. But some viewers who watch us may be asking, so it's been such a period, but we don't know Sachdev, for example, or we don't know his business. Why didn't he become so famous and successful so far? How would you answer to that?
Great point. I mean, who doesn't like popularity and publicity? But in the nature of what we do, Saidaziz, ours is a business-to-business deal. We try to typically fly under the radar of our customers' success. So it's only when they get ahead through the help we gave them that we feel happy and satisfied. So our referenceability tends to be largely large enterprise customers whom we have helped on complex mandates, because organizational transformation is not easy picking. It causes for a lot of disruption and change, culturally, technically. And therefore, we are happy if they're fine, and as long as a few good friends like you and some key stakeholders, both within the government and the private sector, are open to our ideas and suggestions about new innovations through technology, I'll go with smiling.
Actually, most of the things that you're saying now and that you have said while we conversed, they are so interesting and motivating in one way that I have talked to a lot of my peers, Uzbekistanis, who see a lot of challenges in doing business in Uzbekistan. But as an experienced management consultant, an entrepreneur, what would be your assessment to the business climate in Uzbekistan generally? How wide is this window of opportunities?
So I would just openly and candidly say that there is no better time to come into this country, whether you are an innovator, whether you are an investor, whether you are a participant in any other shape or form in the new Uzbek economy. This is absolutely a land of great potential. You've already hit $70-odd billion in your GDP. There's significant economic, social, regulatory, legislative reform. I see huge tailwinds of change blowing across almost on a daily basis. There's a deep hunger to connect with the world. And since both you and I often attend conferences, I'm amazed at the number of delegations that one sees here from all across the world, from various parts, all offering their collaborative friendship, relationship, and services, because there's potential. There is the upside, there's the realization of impact and change. And I would say, to be honest, compared to a dollar invested in the more advanced, mature economies, for an investor, you get greater bang for the buck here, simply because there is more unrealized potential to be.
But as in any other parts of the world, there are challenges. So challenges for the business, it's everywhere, right, Sachdev? So what would you list? What challenges would you list as in Uzbekistan for the business people?
I think that's an extremely important question that you're asking, Saidaziz. So maybe coming in a couple of years ago, one worried about the fact if there was enough investor protection, if we opened companies or entities here, will they have enough protection in terms of resolving any disputes here or repatriating money. And I think, having operated here, I think those concerns are getting significantly less. It also depends on what you're coming out to do here. So if you are highly specialized, if you have something to offer as a supplier to this market that is seen as valuable to them and timely, relevant, prioritized, then of course you hit the ground running faster. If there's something that is a little bit ahead of time, then like in all other markets, one has to play the game of patience. But eventually I think one will succeed if one is determined, one is pursuant, and one is entrepreneurial.
I see. Thank you. And do you think any group of Uzbeks or Uzbekistanis could set up a company just like yours and do all the services what you're doing?
So, I'm very encouraged with the fact that in the IT sector, which relatively speaking is a more recently developed sector in your economy, you've already hit the $100 billion mark of exports in a very, very short time. The number of companies incentivized to operate in the newly built IT parks with all the incentives, all that is a great sign of building up the ecosystem.
But are we there yet? I mean,
so what certainly can happen more is, I think you've already, mastered the art of helping, being some ways the back office for large logistics companies in the US, right? And I see many an Uzbek entrepreneur doing that repeatedly, well and successfully. Question is, can you widen that skill to do work in other sectors? Because the world outsourcing market is large. Like we witnessed in India, it will help create a large number of jobs, and it will democratize wealth. It will call for more generalized skills in customer service. But I think the country should continue embracing English as a language of communication, because that's what will help you connect to the larger Western markets faster than is perhaps today, right? So you should get on the sending side a few smart Uzbek businessmen to send more work here. And then there are obviously friends like us who have done this in other parts of the world. We'll be happy to work alongside many of you to realize the dream.
What about the specific IT skills that we should work on?
Yeah, so I think the areas of improvement would be for youngsters to, so I think in 3 or 4 dimensions. One is, I think, for companies themselves to adopt a more strategic portfolio view of IT, as opposed to doing a one-off tactical IT project to solve a specific point problem, to look at their estate, whether you are a large aviation company, whether you're a large mining company, whether you're a large retailer, to say, what are 3 or 4 things I can use IT for to further my business? How can I grow my business? So growth is one dimension. How do I get more compliant so that I file my taxes in time and fulfill all my obligations to the state? How do I get more customer centric? How do I get more profitable? So if IT can help address one or many of these dimensions, which are these most significant business dimensions, you're starting to take a more strategic view. Then you see what is the appetite to do what is the organizational change needed to achieve a successful IT project. So that's, I think, one thing I would encourage companies to do here, the larger ones, to set the tone.
It's not only about the interface or the most of the one-off
exactly. So that's one thing I would encourage. I would also encourage a greater industry academia connection, where students can spend their summers usefully doing internships, really learning the hard skills, right? As opposed to someone teaching supply chain management. How does the student know how to locate a new retail store like Karzinka? Should it be closer to the market, a new market, or should it be optimized for logistics and distribution costs, right? So immersing them and making them spend their time alongside a practicing manager will really speeden up their learning curve.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your answer. And probably those internships should not be included with the ones that happen in Uzbekistan.
Yeah.
Maybe if students are exposed to some international experience,
Exactly,
somewhere in India, for
sure.
example, that would be
absolutely
great. Thank you very much. And yeah, speaking of students, an interesting fact about you is that after a while you came to Uzbekistan. Prestigious universities like Tashkent State University of Economics, Westminster International University in Tashkent have invited you as lecturer. Can you tell us more about what you teach there?
So, I teach a range of subjects more as a visiting practitioner, because one of the things I said, one of the ways I can give back to this great country is to impart some of my experience, however relevant that is. And because I was picking some of these students from the leading universities to intern in my company, I wanted to have a first-hand experience of the very crucible which produces these students. And I was very gladly surprised that all these leading universities invited me to teach. So, for example, it's been a great honor to teach young, bright Uzbek minds on public-private partnerships and privatization of state-owned assets, which is firmly the direction your president has set forth to completely revitalize the Uzbek economy. And and those are not very simple topics. But what I did, Saidaziz, as part of that whole exercise was also to test myself in my ability to teach. It's one thing to lead a company, it's another thing to teach. And so I learned from many other educators here about the Socratic way of teaching, which is more to help students ask the right questions than actually find the right answers. Because even in business, there are no right answers. It's just a more imaginative, free way of saying, if there's a business problem, if there's an unmet need in the market, how do I best address it? Why should I qualify in the world to be the most suitable candidate to address that problem as a company, and help both find investors in my company or customers for my business. So I think if you open their minds, and it's been a fantastic experience. I've gone to the Japanese garden here in Tashkent to run a school with permission from the university to teach in lovely Tashkent crisp, clean air. And it's been absolutely wonderful.
I hope that contributed to the Socraticness of your teaching.
So I think that's been good. I've also taught supply chain management, I've taught HR, I've taught marketing. But often I think what I tell students is, there's of course the frameworks that is good for learning. But education should not be for living. Education is for life. It's about creating bonds in the university, finding social skills, how not to be rude, how to be perfectly balanced between your own interests, your own competitiveness, and the greater sense of fairness. So I think it's learning a lot of the other skills on how to ask questions, which, to be honest, in the generation I grew up in, we always respected our tutors or our teachers, never to ask questions, purely in deference. But I think this is a generation when they should ask more questions, not necessarily agree, while without being disagreeable, but have the right for dissent. And I think it leads to greater debate, greater informedness.
So, and also I would like to know your opinion about your own students. You must have learned a lot about Uzbek culture, what Uzbekistani students are living and breathing with.
Yeah, and Saidaziz, that's been an absolutely great insight into, if you might, Uzbek lives. Because as a foreigner, sometimes you only see the more touristic view of a country or a city you live in. But this has been a deep immersion. And to be honest, I feel very enriched. And let me explain. So, like students of that generation across the world, unless you're saying something very interesting in the class, you can lose them very, very quickly. and the mobile phone is a great competitor, right? So just in fairness, while initially I could internally feel a little upset for not gaining full attention of my students, I then slowly did my self-reflection, and I said, look, maybe there's some other way I should teach, or how do you make this more conversational? How do you make this more a dialogue rather than a one-way monologue? So I think that's one bit. Like students again of that generation across the world, they are very, very specific about what they need to do in the class to get top marks, because they all want to aim for a distinction. And they say, if I need to get 90 out of 100 in your course, tell me clearly how many multiple choice questions should I answer well and completely, how many essay type questions. So sometimes for someone like me who comes from a slightly more context setting culture, right, to be demanded very specific direction and answers is quite a new thing, which I slowly embraced. You assess them on topics which are in the syllabus. You ask them questions that were supposedly, to be part of the curriculum, as opposed to coming about writing an essay on 5 good things about supply chain or something, right? So it keeps everything in focus. I just would encourage them not to think too much about marks, because while I think it's good to get high marks in the university so that they can maybe get a master's abroad and qualify for that relatively easier, I still feel that the learning aspect is more important, because you don't have to do very well at the university to be a top entrepreneur, right? Many of them didn't even complete education, and some of the great names you and I often talk about. Extremely successful people, right?
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs, for example. And so I think education, like all things, should go into the pot of an entrepreneur's learning, but I think the younger generation should take that in stride, one. 2 is if they can also slowly adapt to learning some bits of curriculum in English. So some of the Uzbek students speak English brilliantly, almost as good as anyone you'd see anywhere in the Western world. And that's hugely encouraging, right? But I just sometimes worry that they will have, therefore, naturally, the most opportunities, because they tend to be differentiatedly skilled on the language front. Whereas there could be very bright Uzbek entrepreneurs who speak the local language, but maybe therefore restricted both in trade and business and commerce to a more local, regional way of engagement, right? So I think if more students try to learn foreign languages.
Speaking of studying masters abroad for fluent in English students, you have previously told me that there were some students who were very much interested in studying abroad and asking reference letters from
Yes, of course. And I think that's quite expected, because they always feel that a top-up education from maybe university in Germany or the US or the UK or anywhere else in Europe like France would help them stand out in the job market, because it gives them the badge of honor to qualify for better employment opportunities even when they come back, right? So I think that's a fair expectation. I encourage them, at least some of them, to stay on, because there's no better time than being here. I mean, look at your public-private partnership strategy from your government standpoint, right? Someone has to run those projects. Those are not easy projects, because there is obviously a large state-owned or government-type investment.
Someone who graduated Tashkent State University of Economics or Westminster should do that.
Exactly. And someone who then understands a private investor's focus. And if the young mind can help do that, project managing some of these projects, then I think that keeps them here. It keeps them with their families. It doesn't need create displacement of labor. And clearly, I think if a country gets its strategy right, if you get to a per capita of $2,800 or even $4,000 by 2030, you are, I think, in very, very good shape, because on a purchasing parity basis, you might as well live here and enjoy all the goodness of life.
And you can always travel and spend some time.
100%.
And when you mentioned about your education background, you studied in Manila based on Harvard Business School curriculum, but you haven't studied in the U.S.
Right.
So students, you don't have to study specifically in the US or in Europe just to be successful entrepreneurs, but you can always go to the Western world, to the developed world, and expose yourself to the new stuff. Can I conclude like that?
Yes.
So, basically, these were all. Sachdev, what question should I have asked and missed to ask? If you have some other messages to deliver, please.
Yeah, I think maybe as representative of foreign companies or investments here, I think often the question comes in my mind as to how do you build trust in these markets? How do you get local customers to buy our services, our goods, our wares more easily? Now, some part of that is my own answer, Saidaziz, if I may, and that is that we as foreigners have to also immerse in local society. It's as much important for me to understand basic Uzbek vocabulary, understand a bit of Russian, to build that cultural bridge. So when I go to the bazaars, I should, talk to farmers and vegetable producers or storekeepers in their language, and that builds a certain bridge and familiarity. So we got to do that as foreigners. On the other side, it would help if we are able to get Uzbek businesses and entrepreneurs to also trust us more, which means also share their challenges and pains a little more openly, so that then the time to discovery gets reduced and we solve for the right things.
Avoiding all the guesswork.
Because I think sometimes that often could be a challenge. But otherwise, I think much is good here, and it's for us to stay the course and win.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sachdev.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. And I hope our viewers will enjoy this conversation.
Kata Rahmat, Saboling.
Arz